I turned 50 on a Tuesday. There was no grand celebration. No balloons or fireworks. Just a slice of pie from the corner diner and the quiet hum of the ceiling fan as I sat alone by the window. I remember thinking, so this is what it feels like. Not old, exactly, but different, like some unseen thread had snapped in the dark, and something familiar had drifted away without a sound. You don't wake up one day and feel like life has ended. No, but you do start to notice certain parts of you stop showing up. I used to have this fire in me, not loud or reckless, just steady, reliable warmth. The kind that pushes you through the day, gives you reason to make one more phone call, fix the leaky faucet, chase a wild dream. And then one morning you realize you've been moving slower, not just with your feet, but with your hope. You sit longer at the edge of the bed, thinking longer before standing. That little spark inside, it dims, not all at once, but quietly, gently, like the sun slipping behind the hill. I didn't lose my ambition, not right away, but I did start questioning its shape. The ladder I was climbing, where did it actually lead? Was I still climbing because I believed in the view at the top, or just because I'd always been climbing? There's a strange kind of grief that comes with realizing you may not want what you spent your whole life chasing. And stranger still, you may not have the time to go after something new. It's hard to explain that kind of mourning. It doesn't wear black. It doesn't cry out in church pews. It just settles in your bones. A quiet awareness that the map you've been following no longer points where it used to. When I was younger, I believed in beginnings, in do-overs. I thought there'd always be another shot, another January, another Monday morning full of promise. But 50 comes with a whisper in your ear. There are only so many fresh starts left, and that changes you. The friendships I had, they didn't explode or fall apart. They just faded. The late-night phone calls turned into occasional texts. The texts turned into silence. People got busy, or tired, or numb. I'm not sure which, but the connections I thought were carved in stone turned out to be drawn in sand, washed away by tides I never saw coming. You don't notice the funeral of a friendship until you've gone weeks, then months, without their name lighting up your screen. And suddenly you remember a laugh you hadn't heard in years, and it aches in your chest like it belongs to someone who died. Even if they're still alive, somewhere out there, just not in your life anymore. And then there's the mirror. At 50, the mirror becomes a quiet judge. Not harsh, just honest. You catch yourself squinting in bathroom light, tracing the folds at the corners of your eyes, wondering when they got so deep. You run a hand through your hair and feel more scalp than strands. You tuck in your stomach out of habit, then slowly stop caring whether you do or don't. Vanity doesn't leave you, exactly. It just becomes quieter, like a song playing from the other room, one you're not dancing to anymore. But the body, oh, the body does speak louder. A pain in the knee that wasn't there last week. A stiffness in your back that refuses to stretch away. Sleep that feels less like rest and more like a brief pause. You stop bounding out of bed. You start negotiating with gravity every time you sit down or stand up. You stop expecting to feel great and start being grateful for feeling fine. It's not all bad. There's a kind of wisdom in it. You begin to treat your body less like a tool and more like an old friend. A friend who's been with you through it all, now asking for a little gentleness in return. You stop punishing it. You start listening. That, too, is something that dies, the illusion that your body will always bounce back. At 50, I also started missing places I'd never returned to. Not exotic destinations, but moments. Sunday dinners at my mother's table. The way my daughter used to fall asleep in my arms. The sound of my father's boots in the hallway after work. You don't even know you're in a golden time until it's long gone. Then one day, you're standing in your kitchen, and the smell of onions on the stove takes you back 30 years. And you stand there, spoon in hand, suddenly not in 2025, but in 1987, hearing laughter that isn't in the room anymore. Time travel is real. It happens in the heart. So many things I used to hold tightly, urgency, approval, plans for someday, started slipping through my fingers. I still had dreams, yes, but they came wrapped in softer paper. Less fire, more glow. I no longer wanted to conquer. I wanted to belong. I no longer needed to prove. I just wanted to understand. There's a silence that arrives at 50. Not the silence of loneliness, though that comes too, but the silence of knowing. You look around and start seeing the layers of life peeling back, revealing what actually matters beneath it all. It's quieter, but deeper. You find meaning not in what's added, but what's left. And perhaps that's what truly begins to die when you turn 50. The noise. The noise of pretending, of striving, of always needing more. And in that stillness, if you're brave enough to sit with it, something else starts to take root. Something else starts to take root. Not ambition, not urgency, but presence. I began to notice the little things more. The sound of birds in the morning, even if I was awake earlier than I wanted to be. The way the sun slipped through the blinds in lines like gentle reminders. I'd sit there with my coffee, not rushing to finish it, just holding the cup like it meant something. And maybe it did. Maybe it always had, but I was too busy before to notice. I had never really understood what people meant when they said, "You find joy in the small things." I used to nod politely, then rush off to my long to-do list, convinced that the joy they were talking about came later, after success, after achievement, after finally getting there, wherever that was. But 50 taught me something unspoken, that later is a gamble, and the quiet, ordinary moments are the only ones that ever truly belong to us. There was a time when I believed that who I was depended on what I could do, the work I did, the titles I earned, the responsibilities I carried. But when some of those were taken away, by time, by circumstance, by inevitability, I had to ask myself, without those things, am I still me? That's a hard question to face when the crowd has moved on, when your phone isn't ringing with requests or meetings, when your name isn't needed in the room anymore. You start to feel like an echo in your own life. And what dies there, quietly, invisibly, is the illusion that your worth is measured by your usefulness. It takes time to replant your roots in something deeper. But once you do, it's freeing. To realize you don't have to impress anymore. That simply being kind or curious or present, that's enough. More than enough, actually. That's the kind of legacy that lingers long after your name is forgotten in boardrooms or inboxes. And then there's the matter of risk. By 50, I'd stopped taking them. Not the wild kind, I never was reckless, really, but the emotional ones. The kind where you tell someone how much they matter to you, even if it makes your voice tremble. The kind where you forgive someone, even if they never apologized. The kind where you try something new, not to master it, but to feel alive again. I had slowly stopped risking myself in those ways. Fear creeps in differently after 50. It's not the fear of failing. It's the fear of feeling too much, of being hurt again, of looking foolish. So we settle, we shrink, we protect the tender places instead of letting them breathe. And in that shrinking, something dies. The courage to live openly. But life, real life, only happens when we're vulnerable, when we care loudly, when we risk being seen. I remember sitting across from my son one afternoon. He was telling me about his new business idea. His face lit up like mine used to when I was younger. And I sat there, nodding, smiling, but inside, I felt hollow. Not because I was jealous, no, but because I realized I hadn't dreamed in a long time. I'd let that part of me go, quietly, like closing the lid on a box I told myself I'd come back to, but never did. Dreams don't always die in fire. Sometimes they just fall asleep and no one wakes them. Looking back, I wish I had told someone that I missed dreaming, that I missed imagining something new, even if it never came true. I wish I'd let myself be foolish again. Sometimes wisdom isn't knowing more. It's being brave enough to feel again. That too is something I had to relearn. And love, oh love, 50, love changes shape. The kind of love that once burned hot, wild and all-consuming, now becomes something steadier. But quieter doesn't mean easier. In fact, it becomes harder in some ways. You start seeing the cracks. You start feeling the weight of the years, the misunderstandings, the things unsaid, the small ways you grew apart while growing older. And if you're not careful, love becomes routine. You stop looking each other in the eyes. You stop reaching across the bed. You stop saying, "I missed you," even when you did. It's not that the love dies exactly, but something in its voice gets quieter, until one day, you realize you haven't really heard each other in months. I know, because I lived it. I remember coming home late from work one night, around 51 or so, and my wife was already asleep. The lamp on her side was still glowing. Her book was open on her chest, and I just stood there in the doorway watching her breathe, and I felt this ache. Not because of anything she did, but because I realized how long it had been since I really looked at her. Not just saw her, but looked, as if seeing her again for the first time. 50 has a way of asking that question. Are you still paying attention? Not just to your partner, but to your own heart. Because it's easy to get lost in the noise of bills and jobs and aging parents and grown kids. Easy to become roommates instead of soulmates. But even that quiet distance isn't permanent. Not if you notice it. Not if you're willing to turn toward it instead of away. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed and touched her hand. She didn't wake up, but something in me did. If you're still here, leave me a comment. Not for me, but for you. Tell me, what part of your own story have you quietly tucked away? What ache still waits to be acknowledged? You never know who might feel a little less alone when they read your words. After that night, I started noticing how many things I'd let go of without even realizing. Not just the big dreams or the deep conversations, but the small rituals. The ones that held meaning simply because they were ours. I used to bring her coffee in the morning, just a simple cup, nothing fancy. She liked it with a splash of cream and 2 sugars. I'd place it beside her book, say something silly like, "Fuel for the Queen," and she'd smile every time. But somewhere along the way I stopped. Not out of anger. Not because I didn't love her anymore. Just life. It gets busy. Then it gets quiet. Then, somehow, we forget the very things that made it beautiful to begin with. And I think that's another thing that dies quietly after 50, ritual. The sacred little habits that tether us to each other. You start to believe they don't matter. But they do. They matter in the way a song matters. In the way a gentle touch before sleep can say what words never quite manage to. They matter because they keep the love warm, even when the fire's burning low. When we stop making time for each other's small needs, love doesn't vanish. It just starves. It shrinks into silence. And by the time we notice, we're often too proud or too tired or too afraid to name it. There were mornings I'd sit across from her in the kitchen and we'd talk about groceries, or who needed a ride, or whether the roof was still leaking, all practical things. And yet I'd walk away from the table feeling lonelier than I had when I woke up. Because we weren't really talking. We were just managing. And there's a vast, aching difference between the two. Took me years to admit that. To see that the death of deep conversation doesn't come with shouting matches or slammed doors. Comes with polite nods. With unanswered questions. With evenings spent in the same room but different worlds. And then there was the silence that followed me to work. I was good at what I did, or so I was told. But sometime after 50, I began to sense a shift. Meetings where my voice used to carry weight now ended without my thoughts being heard. Younger faces entered the room, and suddenly I was the seasoned one. A word that sounds polite but feels like being wrapped in plastic and shelved for later. I didn't mind aging, but I minded being invisible. That's what begins to die in your 50s too, relevance. Not everywhere, not always, but enough to make you question whether you're still needed or simply tolerated. It's a quiet grief, being seen but not sought. I used to stay late hoping to prove something, but I eventually realized I wasn't trying to impress anyone else. I was trying to remind myself that I still mattered, and that's a heavy truth. Because what no one tells you is that your value starts to feel negotiable in midlife. You look at the mirror or your calendar, or the way someone says your name, and wonder if who you are now is enough for the world you're still trying to live in. It took a long time for me to realize that relevance isn't something others give you. It's something you carry from within and offer freely, whether or not it's acknowledged. But that lesson didn't come easily. Came one ordinary Friday afternoon. I had just finished a project I was proud of. It was sharp, thoughtful, full of heart. I submitted it early and I waited, a little too eagerly perhaps, for a word of thanks. Nothing came. Not a note, not a nod, just silence. And in that silence, I felt something inside me sag. Not break, just deflate, like I had been holding a balloon up for hours, smiling, hopeful, and someone quietly let go of the string. That weekend, I went for a walk alone. No music, no company, just my footsteps and the sound of the breeze pushing through the trees. I passed an older man sitting on a park bench. Must have been in his 70s. He was feeding the birds, whistling a tune I vaguely recognized. And for a moment I envied him, not for his peace, but for the way he seemed so unbothered by the world passing him by. I realized then, maybe he knew something I didn't yet. Maybe relevance wasn't about being noticed. Maybe it was about noticing the warmth of sun on your shoulder, the way a child laughs without restraint, the flight of a bird that doesn't care who's watching. That realization didn't fix everything, but it softened something inside me. I went home that evening and pulled out a drawer I hadn't opened in years. Old notebooks, sketches I used to make just for fun, stories I never finished. I ran my hand over the pages like one might touch the face of an old friend, with care, with regret, with affection. That night I wrote a page, not because anyone would read it, not because it was good, but because I remembered that part of me existed. And just like that, something long buried stirred again. I still have that notebook, you know. It sits by my chair now, dog-eared and cluttered with pages. Not elegant, not polished. Just pieces of me, scratched down in ink that sometimes smudges when I pause too long. Some nights I write nothing at all. Just open it, breathe in the scent of old paper, and remember what it felt like to dream without an audience. I think there's something holy about that. When you're young, you share everything. Your plans, your pains, your passions, because you're still trying to be known. But after 50, you begin to crave something different. Not exposure, but intimacy. The kind that doesn't need to be seen by the world, just held quietly in your own hands. And that's something else I lost without realizing. The desire to explain myself. I used to defend every choice, every hesitation, every broken piece of my story. I wanted people to understand me, to see that I was good, that I was trying. But 50 brought with it a soft retreat. Not out of shame, not out of pride, just peace. I no longer needed to be understood by everyone. I just needed to be at peace with myself. And oddly enough, that's when I started forgiving. Not just others, though there was plenty of that to do, but myself. For not being the father I thought I'd be. For working too much when my kids were still small enough to think my presence was everything. For staying quiet when I should have spoken, and speaking when I should have just held someone's hand. There are regrets that whisper through your 50s like wind under a closed door. You don't see them at first, just feel the chill. A name, a memory, a missed goodbye. They arrive without warning. During the drive home, or while folding laundry, or standing at the sink staring into nothing. And you can spend years trying to shut that door. Or you can open it, let the wind pass through, and say, yes, that was real, and it mattered. Regret doesn't need to own you, but it does need to be heard. That's something I wish someone had told me, because for too long, I thought forgiveness was a transaction. That someone had to ask and someone had to answer. But I've learned, sometimes forgiveness is just the grace you give yourself to keep going. It's a soft hand on your own back, a whispered, you didn't know better then, but look at how you're learning now. There's a kind of strength in that, quiet, private, but no less powerful. By the time I was 53, I had started walking every morning before sunrise. Not for exercise, though my doctor would have liked that reason, but for stillness, for solitude. The streets were empty. The world wasn't awake enough yet to be demanding. And in those walks, I rediscovered another thing that had quietly died somewhere along the way. My conversation with God. Not church talk, not memorized verses, just me and him, in the dark, in the quiet, no performance, no requests. Sometimes I didn't even speak. I just walked and listened, and maybe that's the point. You get to a certain age and realize that prayer isn't always about asking. It's about remembering that you're not walking alone. I used to believe God spoke in thunder. Now I think he whispers in the quiet, when you're too tired to pretend, too broken to impress, too honest to hide. There were mornings I'd stop at the same tree near the end of the block. Just stand there, hand on the trunk, forehead resting gently against the bark. And I'd say, sometimes aloud, sometimes only in my heart, I'm still here. I wasn't asking for anything. I was just showing up. I think that's what faith becomes after 50. Not certainty, not noise, but presence. You stop looking for signs and start listening for the silence. And in that silence, if you lean close enough, something inside you starts to pulse again. Soft, steady, like an old friend returning after a long absence. I remember one morning in late October, leaves turning, air sharp but not cruel. I passed a couple on their porch, maybe in their 40s, sipping coffee and laughing about something I couldn't hear. And for a moment I felt a pang. Not jealousy, not sadness, just a tender ache. Because I remembered when that was us. And I realized that time doesn't steal everything at once. Take small things quietly, like a careful thief. A shared inside joke. The way someone calls your name. A certain rhythm to life that disappears before you realize it's gone. But here's the strange gift in all of that. Loss makes room. It clears space for a new kind of noticing. You begin to love people not for who they used to be, but for who they are now, fragile, flawed, still here. You stop expecting wholeness and start finding beauty in the cracks. You begin to hold hands not because you're falling in love, but because you're choosing to stay. And that choice, quiet, daily, often uncelebrated, becomes more powerful than any grand gesture from the days of youth. So many things had slipped away by then, but what remained? Stillness, gratitude, and a growing sense that maybe the things I thought were dying were just changing their shape. I used to think that growing older meant growing lesser. That as time peeled away your layers, strength, sharpness, certainty, what was left would be thinner, dimmer, a faded version of who you once were. But that's not true. Not at all. What I've learned in the decades since 50 is that some things only come into view after enough noise has died down. Like stars. You don't see them in daylight not because they're gone, but because there's too much brightness crowding them out. Midlife, for many of us, is when the world finally quiets enough for the stars to appear. I began noticing the stars again around 55. Not just the ones in the sky, but the ones in people. In myself. In the way a neighbor left soup by our door without a word. In the way my daughter placed her hand on mine at the funeral and didn't let go for a long, long time. In the way my wife looked at me on an ordinary Tuesday and smiled like she still saw the boy I used to be. And there, beneath the weight of lost dreams, fading relevance, and quieter love, I found something that had not died at all. Wonder. It had simply been waiting patiently, humbly, beneath all the layers of doing, proving, fixing. It was still there, still in me, still possible. There's a myth that says life narrows as you age. That after a certain point it becomes all memory, all repetition, no discovery. But I've found the opposite to be true. Once the world stops demanding your attention every minute, you begin to notice what's been patiently waiting to be seen. There are conversations I never could have had in my 30s, too guarded. There are prayers I couldn't have prayed in my 40s, too proud. There are feelings I didn't know how to name until I was well into my 60s. But now I understand the power of presence. Of sitting in a room without needing to fill the silence. Of loving someone without needing them to change. Of forgiving, truly forgiving, because you finally see how messy we all are, and how hard it is just to keep showing up. And I think that's what really begins to live in you after 50, the soul. Not the hurried, ambitious, polished self, but the quiet, enduring, soulful self. The part of you that no longer needs to win or be seen or be right, but simply wants to be real. I don't mourn what I lost anymore. Not in the same way. Yes, certain things died, or at least changed in such a way that they no longer felt familiar. But in their place, something softer was born. Not weaker, softer, like worn leather, like ocean-polished stone, like the voice I'm using now. Slower, steadier, full of pauses and meaning I once didn't know how to hold. Sometimes I walk through the house alone now. The quiet kind of alone, not the lonely kind. And I run my fingers along the backs of old chairs, look at faded photographs and whisper names out loud. Not because I'm trying to summon the past, but because I'm honoring it, letting it know I remember. And when I do, something in me exhales, as if to say, "You've done well, old friend. You kept going, even when parts of you quietly slipped away." If you're around 50 now or just past it, maybe you've already started noticing these quiet deaths. The little goodbyes that don't make noise. The small shifts that change your shape before you even know what's happening. Don't fear them. Grieve them, yes, gently, honestly, but don't fear them, because they are not the end. They are the clearing of space for something deeper to take root, for a different kind of life to begin, one built not on what you do, but on who you are becoming. And if you've made it this far with me, thank you. It means you're listening not just to my story, but to your own. Maybe remembering pieces of yourself you hadn't touched in years. Maybe forgiving something quietly. Maybe lighting a small candle for a dream you thought had gone dark. Whatever brought you here, I'm glad it did. And if you'd like to return, you know where to find me. This space doesn't go anywhere. It waits, just like the stars, just like wonder, and just maybe, just like you.